The rain didn't just fall, it attacked. It hammered against the window of Leo Jackson's bedroom, each drop a tiny fist against the glass. Inside, the world was a small, warm bubble of light, cast by a desk lamp onto the pages of Gideon V. Wainwright. Outside, Chicago was drowning. Then his phone buzzed, a violent shudder on the worn wood of his desk. He ignored it. It was probably just a notification, another distraction from the elegant, brutal logic of the law. But it buzzed again, and then a third time, insistent and frantic. With a sigh, Leo flipped it over. Maya. 3 missed calls. A cold dread, slick and immediate, washed over him. He swiped to call her back. She picked up on the first ring, her voice a ragged whisper, shredded by panic and the howl of the wind. Leo? Maya, what's wrong? Where are you? I messed up, she sobbed, the words tumbling out. Leo, I really messed up. I don't know where I am. North Side somewhere. The party. There was a fight. They just left me. Leo's knuckles whitened around the phone. He squeezed his eyes shut, picturing his 15-year-old sister, who thought she was invincible, stranded in a part of the city that didn't know her and wouldn't care. Stay on the phone. Tell me what you see. A park. Big iron gates. Fancy houses. It's so dark, Leo. And it's so cold. Her voice broke. Please, you have to come get me. The legal arguments on his desk, the clear lines of right and wrong, dissolved into the murky, terrifying reality of the now. I'm coming. Just hide somewhere dry. Don't talk to anyone. I'm on my way. He hung up and was already moving, pulling on a black hoodie and grabbing his Ventra card. His mom was on a double shift at the hospital. It was just him. It was always just him when Maya's new, reckless streak got the better of her. The bus ride from the South Side to Lincoln Park felt like crossing into another country. The familiar, vibrant pulse of his neighborhood, the murals, the corner stores, the symphony of sirens and laughter gave way to a landscape of manicured lawns and silent, imposing brick mansions. The rain smeared the view, turning the glowing windows of these fortress-like homes into blurry, indifferent eyes. He thought of Mr. Finch, his neighbor and mentor, the old, disgraced lawyer who ran their school's mock trial club. Finch's voice, raspy and full of a wisdom that bordered on cynicism, echoed in his head. Remember, Leo, he'd said just last week, tapping a thick legal textbook. The most beautiful lie in American law is the presumption of innocence. It's a shield, but some people have to hold that shield up themselves, while for others, the world holds it for them. Leo had always understood it as a concept. Tonight, crossing the invisible lines that divided Chicago, he was starting to feel it. Here, in this quiet, wealthy enclave, he was an anomaly. A black kid in a hoodie, walking through a storm in a neighborhood where he clearly didn't belong. He felt the weight of presumption settling on his shoulders like the cold, soaking rain. He found the park Maya had described, its ornate gates looking like the entrance to a king's tomb. He called her name, his voice swallowed by the wind. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Panic, sharp and metallic, rose in his throat. He started down a side street, a narrow canyon between towering graystones. The street was empty, save for the ghost-like figures of parked luxury cars. Then he saw it. Halfway down a dark alley that cut between 2 mansions, a Porsche sat with its driver's side door slightly ajar. The interior light was on, casting a soft, eerie glow. It was a beacon in the oppressive darkness. Maybe she's hiding in there, the thought flashed, desperate and illogical. Maybe she found it open and got out of the rain. He moved toward it, his sneakers silent on the wet pavement. He was just trying to protect his sister, just trying to bring her home. That was his only crime. He reached the car, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He put a hand on the cold, wet metal of the door, peering inside. The leather seats were empty. A wave of frustration and fear washed over him. Where was she? That's when the world exploded in white and blue light. A police cruiser had materialized at the end of the alley, its headlights pinning him like an insect. A voice, amplified and distorted by a megaphone, ripped through the night. Freeze, hands where I can see them now. Leo's mind went blank. Instinct took over. He raised his hands slowly, the rain dripping from his fingertips. He was just a kid looking for his sister. He hadn't done anything wrong. An officer, a big, broad-shouldered white man with a grim face, approached him, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered gun. His partner stayed by the car, covering him. "What are you doing with this vehicle?" the officer demanded, his voice low and hard. "Nothing," Leo stammered, his own voice sounding foreign and thin. I was looking for my sister. Her phone died. I thought maybe she—" The officer scoffed, a short, ugly sound of disbelief. He didn't see a scared older brother. He saw a story he'd already written in his head. His eyes swept the ground around Leo's feet, and then they narrowed. "Don't move," he commanded. He bent down and picked something up from the wet asphalt, just inches from Leo's shoe. It was a man's leather wallet. The officer flipped it open, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. "David Vance," the officer read from a driver's license. He looked from the ID to the Porsche, then back to Leo, a grim smile of satisfaction on his face. "Well, well, looks like we found our car thief." "No," Leo said, shaking his head, the full horror of the situation crashing down on him. "No, you don't understand. That's not mine. I've never seen it before." But the officer wasn't listening. The shield of presumed innocence Mr. Finch had talked about felt a million miles away. In this dark alley, in this cold Chicago rain, Leo Jackson was already guilty. "On the ground," the officer snarled, pulling out his handcuffs. "You're under arrest." The cold metal bit into his wrists. The officer pushed him forward, his face pressed against the cold, wet side of the Porsche. He could see his own reflection in the rain-streaked window, a terrified boy with wide eyes, a ghost in a storm that was just beginning. The law he loved, with its promise of justice and fairness, felt like a cruel joke. Here, there was no justice. There was only the alley, the rain, and the crushing weight of a crime he didn't commit. The world shrank to the size of a concrete box. The holding cell was a study in gray walls, the floor, the metal bench bolted to the wall. It smelled of disinfectant and despair. Leo sat on the bench, the initial shock of his arrest hardening into a cold, gnawing anxiety. Every sound echoed, the distant clang of a steel door, the murmur of officers in the hallway, the drip of his own rain, soaked hoodie onto the floor. This wasn't a mock trial. There were no points for well-crafted arguments here, only the stark reality of locked doors and lost time. Hours bled into a formless gray dawn. He replayed the night over and over, searching for the moment it had all gone wrong. It started with Maya's call. He wondered if she was safe, if she had found her way home. The thought was a sharp pang of guilt in his chest. In trying to be her protector, he had walked straight into a cage. A guard finally came for him. The first phone call he made was to his mom. Her voice, thick with sleep and then sharp with alarm, was the first warmth he'd felt in what felt like an eternity. "Leo. Baby, what's wrong?" "Mom, I'm in trouble. I've been arrested." The silence on the other end was heavier than any shout. He could hear her world tilting on its axis. He explained the situation in a rushed, choked whisper, his words feeling flimsy and inadequate against the sterile reality of the police station. "I'm coming," she said, her voice now steel. "Don't you say another word to anyone. I'm coming." His first court appearance was a blur of fluorescent lights and procedural jargon. He was led into a courtroom that felt less like a hall of justice and more like a processing plant. He stood before the judge, a man named Robert Sterling, whose bored, weary expression seemed to dismiss him before he'd even spoken a word. Then he met his court-appointed lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, whose suit was as wrinkled as his face was tired. He pulled Leo aside for a hurried 2-minute conference in a corner of the bustling room. "Leo Jackson, right?" "Grand Theft Auto," Davies said, flipping through a thin file without making eye contact. "Look, son, I've seen this 100 times. They've got you at the scene, prints on the car, victim's wallet at your feet. It's a clean case for them." "But it's not true," Leo insisted, his voice barely a whisper. "I was looking for my sister." Davies finally looked up, his eyes holding a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. It wasn't a look of malice, but of resignation. "And I'm sure you were. But let's be practical. You're a young man from the South Side, found in Lincoln Park at 2 a.m., next to a stolen Porsche. Who do you think a jury is going to believe?" He leaned in closer. "The DA, a guy named Thorne. He's an ambitious one. He'll push for the maximum. My advice? We take a plea. You plead guilty, show remorse, and maybe Sterling gives you probation instead of juvenile detention. It's the best deal you're going to get." The words hit Leo like a physical blow. This man, his supposed advocate, was telling him to surrender before the fight had even begun. He was asking him to trade his truth for a lighter sentence. Leo shook his head, a single, firm gesture. I didn't do it. I won't say I did. Davies sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of frustration. Have it your way, kid. But don't say I didn't warn you. Back in the holding area, the weight of his decision pressed down on him. He was alone, adrift in a system that had already decided his fate. An hour later, a guard's voice echoed down the hall. Jackson, you made bail. Oh. Leo's head snapped up. Bail? His mom couldn't afford bail. It was set at $10,000. When he walked out into the station's lobby, he understood. His mother was there, her face a mask of worry and relief. But she wasn't alone. Standing with her were Pastor Evans from their church, a half-dozen neighbors from their block, and, to his astonishment, Mr. Alistair Finch. His mom wrapped him in a fierce hug, holding him so tightly he could barely breathe. It's okay, baby, she whispered into his hair. We're going to fight this. Pastor Evans clapped a hand on his shoulder. The community is with you, Leo. We passed the plate around this morning. People believe in you. Leo looked at the faces of his neighbors' people who worked 2 jobs, who struggled to make ends meet, and felt a wave of gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. They were holding the shield for him. As his mom handled the last of the paperwork, Mr. Seemalings, Mr. Seans, Finch stepped forward. The old lawyer's eyes, usually clouded with a detached academic curiosity, were sharp and focused. He looked Leo up and down, assessing him not as a scared kid, but as a client. I heard what happened, Finch said, his voice low. I also heard what your public defender advised. Leo nodded, his throat tight. He's not wrong about the odds, Leo. He's just wrong about the fight. Finch's gaze was intense. They think this is an open and shut case. They're comfortable. They've got their narrative, and you fit it perfectly. Our job is to make them uncomfortable. Our job is to tear that narrative to shreds. He followed Finch and his mom out into the weak sunlight, the city air feeling crisp and clean after the stale confinement of the station. He was free, for now, but as they walked away from the cold stone building, Leo knew he had just left one cage for another, much larger one. That evening, as the city lights began to glitter outside his window, Mr. Finch arrived at their apartment. He didn't carry a briefcase, just a single, worn legal pad and a pen. He sat at their small kitchen table, across from Leo and his mom, and the air crackled with a new energy. It wasn't the energy of fear anymore. It was the energy of resolve. Finch tapped his pen on the pad. They think you're just another statistic, another file to be closed, he said, his eyes locking onto Leo's. They think the kid from the south side will just roll over. We're going to show them just how wrong they are. He slid the legal pad across the table. Now, tell me everything, every detail. From the moment Maya called, the fight had begun. Mr. Finch's apartment was a fortress of books. They lined every wall from floor to ceiling, a dense tapestry of legal history, philosophy, and classic literature. The air smelled of old paper and dust, a scent Leo had always associated with wisdom. Their kitchen table became a war room, buried under police reports, discovery documents, and Finch's meticulous spidery notes. Here, Finch said, sliding a copy of Officer Miller's incident report across the table. Read it. Then read it again. Don't look for the lies yet. Look for the laziness. Incompetence is the mother of injustice. Leo scanned the dry, formulaic language. It painted a picture of a routine arrest. A suspect caught in the act, evidence secured, no complications. But as he followed Finch's instruction, tiny cracks began to appear. Miller's description of Leo's behavior acting suspiciously, attempting to flee was vague, almost generic. This paragraph here, Leo pointed, it's almost identical to a section from a case we studied for mock trial last year. The phrasing, it feels like boilerplate. A rare, thin smile touched Finch's lips. Exactly. He wasn't writing a report. He was filling in a template. The template for young black male, high-value theft. He saw what he expected to see, and he wrote what he was expected to write. Now, let's find a way to use his laziness against him. They worked for days, fueled by coffee and his mom's determined support. Finch was a demanding teacher, pushing Leo to think not like a student, but like a lawyer. He taught him how to file motions, how to dissect witness statements, how to find the pressure points in the prosecution's case. For the first time since his arrest, Leo felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't just a defendant anymore. He was a combatant. Mr. Finch, Leo said one evening, looking up from a stack of legal precedents. I have to ask, why won't you represent me? Officially, I mean. We could fire Mr. Davies. You could be my lawyer. The light in Finch's eyes dimmed. He leaned back in his chair, the worn leather groaning in protest. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, the silence stretching until it became heavy. "Because I can't," he said finally, his voice flat. "The Illinois State Bar doesn't allow ghosts to practice law." He rose and walked to a locked cabinet in the corner, a piece of furniture Leo had never seen him open. He returned with a yellowed newspaper clipping, the edges brittle with age. The headline read, "Prominent Defense Attorney Alistair. Finch disbarred amid bribery scandal. End of 20. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He read the article, his heart sinking with every word. 10 years ago, Finch had been at the top of his game, a brilliant defense attorney known for taking on impossible cases. He had been defending a young black man named Jamal Williams, framed for a crime he didn't commit. "It was a Judge Sterling case," Finch said, his voice a low rasp. "I found proof that the police had planted evidence, a signed affidavit from a disgruntled officer. The day before I was to present it, the officer recanted. He claimed I had bribed him." "They set you up," Leo whispered, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "The system protects itself," Finch said, a profound bitterness in his tone. "They took my license, my reputation, my life's work. They made an example of me." The message was clear. Don't dig too deep. Don't challenge the ones on the bench. I can guide you, Leo. I can give you the weapons. But I cannot stand beside you in that courtroom. It would do more harm than good. The revelation left Leo reeling. The man who was his only hope was a pariah, a casualty of the very system they were trying to fight. The weight of his own situation felt impossibly heavier. The next day, they had a scheduled meeting with Mr. Davies. The public defender listened with barely concealed impatience as Leo, channeling Finch's logic, laid out the inconsistencies in the police report and the need to file a motion to suppress the evidence found at the scene. Davies just shook his head. "It's a long shot, kid. A motion like that will just antagonize Sterling. Look, Thorne's office came back with a new offer. 6 months in juvie, record expunged when you turn 18. It's a gift. Take the deal." "No," Leo said, his voice firm. The conversation with Finch had solidified his resolve. A lighter sentence was still a cage. "I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do." Davies threw his hands up in exasperation. "Fine, you want to commit career suicide before you even have a career. Be my guest. But I won't be a party to it." He stood up, gathering his files. "I'll file the paperwork to be removed as counsel. You're on your own." The door slammed shut, leaving Leo in a silence that felt both terrifying and liberating. He was untethered. No lawyer, no official advocate, just the secret guidance of a disbarred attorney. That night he couldn't sleep. He paced his small room, the city lights painting stripes on the floor. He could take the plea. He could make all of this go away, trade a piece of his soul for a few months of his life. Or he could fight. He could stand in that courtroom, alone, and face the full force of the state. He thought of Mr. Finch, of his mother's unwavering belief, of the neighbors who had scraped together his bail money. He was fighting for more than just himself. And made his decision. The next morning, at a preliminary hearing, he stood before Judge Sterling. The judge looked down at him over his glasses, his expression one of pure annoyance. "Mr. Jackson," Sterling said, his voice dripping with condescension, "it has come to my attention that you have dismissed your counsel. The court will appoint a new one." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs, but his voice, when it came, was clear and steady. He met the judge's gaze without flinching. "That won't be necessary, Your Honor." Sterling raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And why is that?" Leo took a deep breath, the air in the courtroom feeling thick and heavy. He could feel every eye on him, the bailiffs, the court reporter, the smug look on Marcus Thorne's face. He was a lamb walking into a lion's den. But sometimes a lamb has to learn to bite. "Because, Your Honor," Leo said, his voice ringing with a conviction he didn't know he possessed, "I will be representing myself." A wave of stunned silence rolled through the courtroom, so profound that Leo could hear the hum of the overhead lights. It was followed by a ripple of snickers. The bailiff smirked. The court reporter looked up from her machine, her eyebrows raised. Across the room, prosecutor Marcus Thorne let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. Judge Sterling stared down at Leo from the bench, his initial annoyance curdling into a mixture of contempt and morbid curiosity. "You will be doing what, Mr. Jackson?" "Representing myself, Your Honor," Leo repeated, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. He was channeling every mock trial competition, Every late-night session with Mr. Finch. Project Confidence. Even when you have none. So be it, Sterling declared after a long, theatrical pause, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He clearly relished the prospect of watching this audacious teenager self-destruct. The court advises you against this course of action, but it is your constitutional right. Let the record show the defendant has waived his right to counsel and will proceed pro se. Mr. Thorne, call your first witness. The trial began in earnest. The air thickened with tension. Thorne, radiating an almost predatory confidence, strode to the lectern. The state calls Officer Daniel Miller to the stand. Officer Miller walked to the witness box with a practiced swagger. He took the oath and settled into the chair, his uniform crisp, his expression a mask of civic duty. Thorne led him through his testimony with smooth, easy questions. Miller recounted the night of the arrest, his narrative clean and damning. He described seeing Leo acting furtively, attempting to pry open the vehicle's door, and being caught red-handed with the owner's wallet nearby. It was a simple, powerful story designed to lodge itself in the jury's mind. "Thank you, officer," Thorne concluded, turning to the jury with a look that said, "See? Case closed." He then gestured dismissively toward Leo. "Your witness." This was it. Leo's legs felt like lead as he walked to the podium. He took a deep breath, the scent of old wood and floor polish filling his lungs. He could feel the weight of a dozen skeptical gazes. He looked at the jury, then at Officer Miller. "Good morning, Officer Miller," Leo began, his voice steadier than he expected. "I just have a few questions to clarify your testimony for the court." He started slowly, methodically, just as Finch had taught him. He didn't challenge the core of the story yet. He nibbled at the edges. "Officer, in your report, you stated you were on a routine patrol. Could you describe that route for us?" Miller hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Standard patrol, cruising the sector." "The sector covering Lincoln Park?" Leo pressed. "Your usual beat is in Lakeview, several miles south, isn't it? According to your own patrol logs for the past 6 months. A flicker of annoyance crossed Miller's face. "We were directed to provide supplemental coverage that night." "I see," Leo said, making a note on his legal pad. "Now, you testified that you saw me attempting to pry open the vehicle's door. But the initial crime scene report, which you signed, states the door was found partially ajar. Those are two very different things, aren't they? One implies breaking and entering. The other could simply be touching a door that was already open." Miller's jaw tightened. From my vantage point, it looked like he was trying to force it. "Your vantage point," Leo repeated, turning to face the jury, "which was, according to your report, nearly 50 yards away, at the end of a poorly lit alley, during a rainstorm. You're certain you could see that level of detail?" Thorne shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is badgering the witness." "Sustained," Sterling grunted, glaring at Leo. "Get to the point, Mr. Jackson." Leo nodded, unfazed. He was getting under Miller's skin. "Now for the main thrust. Officer Miller, all sworn officers in the Chicago Police Department are required to wear body-worn cameras, correct?" "Yes. And department policy dictates that these cameras should be activated immediately upon engaging with a potential suspect to record the entirety of the interaction for an objective record. Is that also correct?" A bead of sweat trickled down Miller's temple. "That's the general policy. And then I'd like to direct your attention to your body camera footage from the night of my arrest," Leo said, his voice gaining strength. He signaled to the clerk. "Your Honor, I would like to play People's Exhibit C for the court." The courtroom monitors flickered to life. The footage was shaky, showing the rain-slicked dashboard of the cruiser. Then Miller got out. The image jostled as he walked. Then, for 2 full minutes, the screen was black, though the sound of his footsteps and the rain continued. Suddenly, the image returned, perfectly focused on Leo, who was already in the process of being handcuffed against the Porsche. The audio, which had been active, captured Miller's commands. Leo paused the video. "Officer Miller," he said, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom. "The video feed from your camera is missing for the 2 minutes immediately preceding my arrest. The crucial moments of your initial approach and confrontation. Can you explain to the court why your camera was apparently deactivated during that specific time?" Miller shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Technical malfunction. The rain, maybe. It happens. A technical malfunction that conveniently ended the moment I was already in restraints?" Leo let the question hang in the air. "And officer, department policy also requires you to report any such malfunction immediately. Did you file a report for this malfunction? Miller's face was stone. I don't recall. Because you didn't, Leo stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Because there was no malfunction. You deactivated it yourself. He turned back to the jury, his voice low but clear. What happened in those 2 minutes, officer? The 2 minutes that the city of Chicago paid for a camera to record, but that you chose to hide? Objection, Thorne shouted, his voice sharp with alarm. Speculation. Sustained. Sterling slammed his gavel. Mr. Jackson, you will refrain from making baseless accusations. But the damage was done. Leo hadn't proven his innocence, but he had done something arguably more important. He had introduced reasonable doubt. He had shown the jury that the official story had holes. He had taken the prosecution's star witness and chipped away at his credibility, revealing the fallible, perhaps even deceptive, man beneath the uniform. As he walked back to his table, he caught Mr. Finch's eye from the public gallery. The old man gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a small victory. A single cut against a giant. But it was a start. The first cut is always the deepest. The small victory in the courtroom felt like a lifetime ago. The trial dragged on. A grueling marathon of legal procedure. Thorne, stung by Leo's cross-examination of Officer Miller, was now relentless. He paraded a series of forensic technicians and inventory clerks to the stand, each one adding another layer to the seemingly airtight case. They confirmed Leo's fingerprints were on the outside of the car door. They confirmed the wallet belonged to David Vance, the car's owner. Each piece of testimony was a brick being laid in the wall of Leo's guilt. Evenings were spent back in Finch's apartment, poring over the day's transcripts and preparing for the next. The initial adrenaline had faded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Leo was holding his own, but he was just playing defense. He wasn't winning. He was just not losing as quickly as everyone expected. We're missing something, Finch muttered one night, staring at a mountain of paperwork as if he could will a new fact into existence. Thorne is too confident. He's not just relying on Miller's testimony. There has to be more. Their breakthrough came from a place they hadn't thought to look. As part of the discovery process, they had received a massive data dump from the city's 911 dispatch center. It contained thousands of calls from the night of the storm, a chaotic symphony of emergencies, big and small. Finch had insisted they get it all, not just the calls directly related to the stolen Porsche. Never trust the prosecution to give you only what's relevant, he'd said. They give you what's helpful to them. Leo spent an entire night listening to the audio files, his eyes burning from staring at the computer screen. And then he found it, a call logged 20 minutes before the Porsche was even reported stolen. The timestamp was 1:47 a.m. The caller was a frantic woman from a Lincoln Park address, just 2 blocks from where Leo was arrested. He clicked play. 911, what's your emergency? A calm dispatcher's voice said. There's a car, a Porsche. I think it's flying down my street. It almost hit my neighbor's fence, a woman's panicked voice replied. It just screeched around the corner. The driver looked like a kid. Can you describe the driver, ma'am? I only got a quick look. Young, maybe a teenager. White, blonde hair, I think. He was driving like a maniac. Leo's heart stopped. He played it again, then a third time. White, blonde hair. The call was never mentioned in any police report. It was never included in the evidence packet Thorne had provided. It had been intentionally buried in a mountain of irrelevant data, a needle in a digital haystack they were never meant to find. He immediately called Finch, his voice electric with excitement. But the real revelation came later that night. He was in his room, the 911 call still echoing in his head, when his door creaked open. It was Maya. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and shadowed with a guilt she could no longer bear. She had been quiet and withdrawn ever since his arrest, a ghost in their own apartment. Leo, she whispered, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. I have to tell you something. He sat up, his own problems momentarily forgotten. What is it, Maya? Are you okay? Tears welled in her eyes and streamed down her face. No, she choked out. It's my fault. All of this. It's my fault. She sat on the edge of his bed, and the story came tumbling out, a torrent of fear and shame. The party hadn't just involved a fight. It was at the Vance mansion. The friend who had invited her was a classmate who was trying to get in with the owner's son, Ethan Vance. Ethan was the one who was drunk, who started the fight, who was showing off for everyone. When things got bad, he grabbed his dad's car keys to take off. Maya sobbed. I saw him. He was the one driving like a crazy person. He swerved down that alley where you were, jumped out of the car, and just ran for it. Oh. Leo stared at her, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into place with blinding clarity. Ethan Vance, the owner's son, the white kid with blonde hair. Why didn't you say anything? Leo asked, his voice gentle, trying to untangle the knot of her fear. I was so scared, she said, her voice trembling. He saw me watching him from the corner. After he ditched the car, he ran right past me. He grabbed my arm and said, if I ever told anyone what I saw, he'd make my life a living hell. He said his dad would take care of it, that they'd pin it on someone else. I never thought it would be you. She unfolded the crumpled paper in her hand. It was a drawing she had made from memory, a frantic sketch of the boy she saw that night. The face was detailed, the blonde hair unmistakable. And she had added one more detail, something she hadn't dared to say out loud until now. Before he ran, she whispered, pointing to a spot on the drawing near the alley. I saw him throw something. It glinted under the streetlight. He threw it into that big green dumpster on the corner. Leo looked from the drawing to his sister's tear-streaked face. The 911 call had given him a ghost. Maya had just given him a name, a face, and a location. He now knew, with absolute certainty, who the real criminal was. And more importantly, he knew there was physical evidence out there, waiting in a dumpster, that could prove it. The question was, could he get to it before they did? The courtroom felt different the next day. Armed with Maya's confession and the 911 call, Leo felt a surge of righteous power. He was no longer just defending himself, he was on the attack. His first move was to formally introduce the 911 call as evidence. He stood before the bench, his voice ringing with newfound confidence. Your Honor, I wish to submit a newly discovered piece of evidence. A 911 call, made at 1:47 a.m., on the night of the incident, in which an eyewitness describes the driver of the stolen vehicle as a white male with blonde hair. A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. Marcus Thorne shot to his feet, his face a mask of controlled fury. Objection. Relevance? This is a desperate attempt to create a smokescreen. The defendant was apprehended at the scene. An anonymous, uncorroborated call from a panicked neighbor is hearsay and has no bearing on the facts. It has every bearing, Your Honor, Leo countered, his gaze unwavering. It provides an alternative suspect description that the police and the prosecution conveniently ignored, a description that points to another individual entirely. Ethan Vance. The name hung in the air like a live grenade. Judge Sterling's face, which had been a canvas of bored indifference, hardened into granite. He slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking like a whip. That is enough, Mr. Jackson, he thundered, his voice booming through the courtroom. This court will not entertain wild, unsubstantiated accusations. The identity of Mr. Vance's son is irrelevant to the matter at hand, which is whether you stole this vehicle. The objection is sustained. The 911 call is inadmissible, and you will not mention the name Ethan Vance in this courtroom again. Is that understood? The ruling was so swift, so blatantly biased, that it sucked the air out of Leo's lungs. It wasn't just a legal setback. It was a declaration of war. Sterling wasn't just a judge. He was a gatekeeper, actively protecting someone. Leo stood his ground. But, Your Honor, the description matches. I said, is that understood? Sterling roared, his face turning a blotchy red. One more outburst like that, and I will hold you in contempt of court. End one. Defeated, Leo sat down, his mind reeling. The system wasn't just broken, it was rigged. He could feel an invisible hand, powerful and unseen, manipulating the scales of justice against him. That night, Finch's apartment was thick with a grim silence. The blatant injustice had shaken even the old lawyer's cynical composure. He's protecting him, Finch said, pacing the worn rug in front of his bookshelves. Sterling isn't just biased. He's actively suppressing evidence. The question is why. While Leo reviewed the day's transcript, Finch made a phone call. He spoke in low-coded tones to someone Leo couldn't identify, a voice from his past, a source still loyal to the disgraced attorney. Leo could only catch fragments. Vance, Sterling, campaign finance, city contracts. When Finch hung up, his face was pale, his expression more grave than Leo had ever seen it. It's worse than we thought, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It's not just a cover-up for a reckless teenager. It's a conspiracy. He laid out the truth. A web of corruption so vast it seemed impossible. David Vance, Ethan's father, wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was one of the biggest political donors in Chicago. His largest contributions had gone to a PAC that directly funded Judge Sterling's judicial retention campaign. Furthermore, Vance's construction company was the lead bidder on a massive billion-dollar contract to redevelop a section of the city's riverfront deal that required favorable rulings and legal support from the very offices of Judge Sterling and prosecutor Marcus Thorne. "Don't you see?" Finch's voice was laced with a horrified understanding. A scandal involving a spoiled kid in a stolen car could jeopardize everything. It would create a media firestorm, taint the family name, and put that billion-dollar contract at risk. So, they needed it to disappear. The pieces fell into place, forming a picture of breathtaking corruption. "I wasn't just a defendant," Leo said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I was a solution. A neat and tidy way to close the case." He was the perfect scapegoat. His presence at the scene was a gift, a convenient narrative that protected the powerful. The color of his skin made him an easy target, his guilt presumed from the moment Officer Miller laid eyes on him. The entire weight of the city's power structure was aligned to ensure his conviction, not because they believed he was guilty, but because his guilt was useful. A cold fear, deeper than any he had felt before, settled in his stomach. He wasn't in a courtroom. He was on a chessboard, a lone pawn facing kings and queens who had written the rules of the game. Every move he made, every piece of evidence he uncovered, was being blocked by an invisible wall of power and money. Finch walked to the window and stared out at the glittering, indifferent city. "They think they have you trapped, Leo," he said softly. "They've locked every door and barred every window. They believe they're untouchable." He turned, a flicker of the old fire returning to his eyes. "Our job is to prove them wrong. Our job is to find the one key they forgot about, the one crack in their fortress." He looked at Leo, his gaze intense. "Tell me about the dumpster again." The trial was spiraling towards its inevitable conclusion. Thorne, sensing victory, moved with the unhurried grace of a predator toying with its prey. He called his final witnesses forensic experts who spoke in dry, clinical terms about fingerprint analysis and chain of custody, each word another nail in Leo's coffin. The jury's faces, which had shown flickers of doubt during Miller's cross-examination, were now settling into masks of weary conviction. Hope was a dwindling resource. Leo felt the walls closing in. Every attempt to introduce the truth was blocked by Sterling's gavel. He was trapped in a nightmare of procedure, forced to fight on a battlefield where the very ground was hostile. During a brief recess, he sat at the defense table, his head in his hands. Maya was in the gallery, her face a portrait of anguish. It was her whispered words from days before that echoed in his mind, a final, desperate Hail Mary. He threw it into that big green dumpster on the corner. It was insane. The dumpster would have been emptied a dozen times by now, but it was all he had left. He huddled with Finch in the hallway. "We have to try," Leo insisted, his voice low and urgent. "It's the only move we have left." "Avery." Finch nodded, his mind already working, sifting through the labyrinth of legal code. "It's a long shot. A motion for discovery of evidence, mid-trial, based on uncorroborated information. Sterling will laugh it out of court. Then we don't file it with Sterling," Leo said, an idea sparking in the darkness. "We file an emergency motion with the presiding judge of the criminal division. It's a procedural loophole, but it exists. We can argue that my right to a fair trial is being actively obstructed by the sitting judge's bias, and this evidence is critical to my defense." It was a bold, almost reckless strategy. Going over a judge's head was a cardinal sin in the legal world, a move that could backfire spectacularly, but they were out of options. They spent the entire lunch break drafting the motion in the courthouse library, Finch dictating the precise legal language, while Leo typed frantically on a public computer. They filed it electronically just minutes before court was set to reconvene. When they returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed. A clerk hurried to the bench and handed Judge Sterling a note. As he read it, a dark flush crept up his neck. He had been blindsided. "This court is in recess pending a ruling from the presiding judge's office," Sterling announced, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. He glared at Leo, a look of pure venom in his eyes. He knew exactly what Leo had done. For 2 agonizing hours, they waited. Finally, the clerk returned with the verdict. A different judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Annabelle Clark, entered the courtroom. She was the presiding judge, Sterling's superior. "I have reviewed the emergency motion filed by the defendant, Mr. Jackson," Judge Clark announced, her voice crisp and authoritative. While highly unorthodox, the claims of potential judicial bias and suppressed exculpatory evidence are serious enough to warrant action. The court grants the defendant's motion for the immediate seizure and search of the specified sanitation container. The Chicago Police Department will secure the location and transport the container to a secure facility for examination. This court will oversee the process directly. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Thorne was on his feet, protesting vehemently, but Judge Clark silenced him with a single icy stare. Leo felt a dizzying surge of relief. He had kicked the door down. The search was a surreal affair. Under the bright, sterile lights of a police evidence garage, sanitation workers, supervised by Judge Clark's own clerk, and a stunned-looking Thorne, carefully emptied the contents of the massive green dumpster onto a vast blue tarp. The stench of wet garbage was overwhelming. It seemed hopeless, a search for a needle in a mountain of trash. They sifted through bags of household waste, soggy newspapers, and discarded food for what felt like an eternity. Leo's hope began to fade with each new pile of refuse. And then, a shout. "Wait, I've got something." A young officer, wearing thick protective gloves, held up a small object. It was a set of car keys, the Porsche logo clearly visible on the fob. A murmur went through the small crowd of observers. "Keep looking," Judge Clark commanded. Minutes later, the same officer reached into a stained takeout bag and pulled out another object. It was a cheap, disposable cellphonia burner. It was slimy with coffee grounds and refuse, but it was intact. This was it. The glinting object Maya had seen. "I want this phone opened," Judge Clark ordered, turning to the forensics technician on site. "Now, I don't care what you have to do." The technician worked quickly, connecting the burner phone to a portable diagnostics unit. After a tense few minutes of bypassing the simple lock screen, the phone's contents flashed onto his laptop monitor. The gallery was small, just text messages and a few saved media files. The technician's eyes widened. He turned the laptop screen toward Judge Clark. She peered at it, her expression unreadable. Then, she looked up, her gaze sweeping over Thorne, and finally landing on Leo. On the screen, clearly visible, even from a distance, was a short 10-second video file. The thumbnail showed the interior of a luxury car, a young man with blonde hair laughing maniacally into the camera as the city lights blurred past him. It was Ethan Vance, and he had filmed himself committing the crime. The return to the courtroom was electric. The news of what was found in the dumpster had spread through the courthouse like wildfire. The gallery was packed, a sea of reporters, curious lawyers, and members of Leo's community, all buzzing with anticipation. Judge Sterling was back on the bench, but his authority had vanished. He looked small and pale under the weight of Judge Clark's silent, observing presence from the side. "The court is back in session," Sterling mumbled, his voice a mere shadow of its former thunder. Leo stood, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a powerful, surging sense of vindication. "Your Honor, at this time, the defense would like to present Exhibit D." He didn't need to say more. All eyes turned to the courtroom monitors. The technician hit play. The video was short, shaky, and damning. Ethan Vance's face filled the screen, smug and reckless, the city lights a chaotic blur behind him. "Check it out," he yelled over the roar of the engine. "Dad's gonna have to buy me a new one after this joyride." He let out a whoop of drunken laughter, then flipped the camera around to show the Porsche's dashboard, the speedometer needle climbing dangerously. The video ended as abruptly as it began. A collective, audible gasp swept through the courtroom. It was the smoking gun. It was the absolute, irrefutable truth, played out on a 50-inch screen for the world to see. Marcus Thorne stood frozen at the prosecution's table, his face ashen. The intricate web of lies he had so carefully woven had been set ablaze. He looked at Judge Sterling, then at the jury, whose faces were a mixture of shock and fury. They weren't just looking at Leo anymore. They were looking at the men who had tried to wrongfully convict him. Before Sterling could even react, a Gerora middle-aged black man who had watched Leo with intense scrutiny throughout the trial stood up. His voice, calm but firm, filled the stunned silence. "We've seen enough, Your Honor." It was an unprecedented breach of protocol, but no one stopped him. The dam had broken. Thorne, seeing his career and his future dissolving before his eyes, finally moved. He walked slowly to the lectern, his confident stride gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of a defeated man. Your Honor, he said, his voice hoarse. The state moves to dismiss all charges against the defendant, Leo Jackson. Judge Sterling, looking utterly broken, could only nod. Case dismissed, he whispered. The courtroom erupted, not into cheers, but into a chaotic roar of outrage and relief. Reporters scrambled for the doors. Leo's mother was openly weeping, held up by Pastor Evans. Maya ran to Leo, throwing her arms around him in a desperate, relieved hug. Leo stood still for a moment, letting the reality of the words wash over him. Case dismissed. He was free. The aftermath was a political earthquake that shook Chicago to its foundations. The video went viral, and the story of Leo Jackson, the teenage boy who defended himself against a corrupt system, became national news. A federal investigation was launched immediately. Judge Sterling was suspended, and he resigned in disgrace before he could be impeached. Marcus Thorne was fired, and he surrendered his law license to avoid criminal prosecution. Ethan Vance was arrested, his father's money and influence unable to shield him from the fallout. The billion-dollar city contract was put on hold, and the Vance empire began to crumble under the weight of the scandal. A few months later, Leo stood on the steps of the courthouse, the autumn sun warm on his face. The building no longer seemed menacing. It was just a building, a place of stone and law, capable of both great injustice and, as he had proven, profound truth. He held an acceptance letter in his hand, a full scholarship to the University of Chicago Law School. Next to him stood Mr. Finch. The State Bar, in light of the federal investigation that exonerated him, had reinstated his license. He was in the process of opening a small, non-profit legal aid clinic in their neighborhood. Justice is not a destination, Leo, Finch said, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's a fight you have to be willing to wage every single day. Leo looked out at the city skyline. He wasn't the same scared kid who had been arrested in a dark alley. The fire of that trial had forged him into something stronger. He had faced down the system and won, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been judged by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. He knew his fight was far from over. This was only the beginning. He would go to law school. He would learn the law inside and out, not just from books, but with the wisdom of his own experience etched into his soul. And one day, he would return to these courtrooms. But he would not be the one on trial. He would be the one standing for others, the one holding the scales, fighting to make them balance for everyone. He had found his calling not in the pages of a textbook, but in the heart of the storm, and he was ready for whatever came next.